We are moving up the chain in our study of ecology. So recently we talked about populations, which are groups of organisms of the same species living in the same place at the same time. And this is video 4.3 on communities, with a special emphasis on predation and competition. This video will cover these 4 instructional goals. Pause the video now for a closer look. So it's important to know, what is a community in the first place? A community is just a collection of populations of different species that live in the same place at the same time and interact with one another. So community ecology is all about asking questions that have to do with, how do species interact with one another? Interactions between 2 different species are called interspecific interactions. And there are a lot of types of interspecific interactions that we'll talk about in class, but this video will focus on 2, competition and predation. Of course, we already know that predation is when one species interacts with another species by eating the other species. And we already know about this, but I want to focus a little closer on how the predation can change both species. The selection pressure of predators causes prey to develop better defenses, but then those better defenses of the prey act as pressure on the predators so that the predators develop better hunting strategies, and the evolution battle to stay ahead races on. This back and forth evolution as a result of predation is called coevolution. Coevolution has resulted in some pretty fantastic traits in organisms, including chemical defenses, camouflage, aposematic coloration, and mimicry. And so let's go through those, starting with chemical defenses. Chemical defenses often include poisons or other irritants, and one example is bee venom. Did you know that a bee stinger is hooked up to a venom sac, that after the bee stings, the stinger pumps venom into the organism that's been stung? Likewise, pufferfish and poison dart frogs use poisons to deter predators that might mess with them. And here's a cool guy down here, the bombardier beetle, and they have chemical defenses too. If a bombardier beetle detects a threat, the beetle's body mixes together 2 chemicals, and when the chemicals are mixed together, they shoot out of the beetle and burn anything that gets sprayed with acid and heat. Camouflage is another defense that's arisen from predator-prey interactions. Camouflage can also be called cryptic coloration. Prey use cryptic coloration to avoid detection by predators, and predators use cryptic coloration to get their sneak on while hunting. There are several examples here. Can you spot the organism in each picture? But sometimes organisms don't want to hide. Sometimes they want to be seen. Aposematic coloration is a bright warning coloration that tells predators, stay away. The idea here is that the prey organism gives the predator some unpleasant experience. So, for example, these caterpillars, these frogs, and this lionfish are all poisonous. And the species are relying on predators learning to associate their color pattern with an unpleasant experience from trying to eat them, and then stay away after just one encounter. We all know about skunks, so when you see that white stripe, you stay away. Aposematic coloration means stay away from me. What's interesting is that evolution has resulted in some of these aposematic coloration patterns developing in unrelated organisms. If predators learn that a coloration of black with some yellow-orange stripes is unpleasant, then maybe they'll stay away from all prey with that coloration. This case of aposematic coloration is called Mullerian Mimicry. Mullerian mimicry is when several poisonous organisms share the same aposematic coloration pattern. These millipedes, butterflies, and frogs all produce irritating chemicals that predators don't like, and they all have the same warning pattern. It wasn't planned, evolution just works out that way sometimes. But if it's advantageous to have that color pattern, some organisms are going to take advantage of it. In a situation called Batesian mimicry, harmless species mimic the coloration patterns of harmful species. Take, for example, the viceroy butterfly. Because of their coloration, viceroys are often mistaken for monarch butterflies. Monarchs store toxic chemicals from milkweed plants in their bodies, so when predators like this blue jay eat monarchs, the predator has a violent reaction. So blue jays quickly learn to avoid monarchs, but they'd avoid viceroy butterflies too, even though viceroys are pretty tasty from what I hear. Viceroy butterflies are Batesian mimics of monarch butterflies. Now, if you've ever had a wasp sting, you know to leave these guys alone, but some flies have developed to be Batesian mimics of wasps. Some flies are pretty good at it, and some are not so good. Really, dude? You expect me to think you're a wasp? One thing that's cool is that predators can use mimicry too. Alligator snapping turtles have a part of their tongue that they move around like a worm. Prey literally swim right into the turtle's mouth. And did you know that firefly flashing patterns are their mating calls? Well, one firefly species will actually mimic the mating flashing pattern of another firefly species. So an unsuspecting firefly swoops in, thinking it's about to mate, but then it becomes a meal. So now I want to switch gears to competition. We'll talk about two types of competition: intraspecific competition and interspecific competition. Intraspecific competition is competition within the same species. This is the competition that we talked about before in our evolution unit. Intraspecific competition affects single populations. We know that overreproduction is what causes competition for a limiting resource, and the outcome of that competition is that the best adapted organisms survive the competition and reproduce more frequently. Intraspecific competition is the story of natural selection. What's new to this video is interspecific competition, which is competition between two different species. Interspecific competition affects communities. Interspecific competition happens when different species are competing for the same limiting resource. The outcome of this interaction is what we're interested in here. Interspecific competition can result in competitive exclusion, resource partitioning, and character displacement. So let's talk about these three things. To dive into interspecific competition, it's important to understand a key word: niche. Now, some people say niche and some people say niche, so both are okay. I usually say niche because I don't want anybody to think I'm calling them names, if you know what I'm saying. Anyway, a lot of people wrongfully use niche and habitat interchangeably. A habitat is just a place where an organism lives, or think of it as kind of like the workplace of the organism. A niche, on the other hand, is kind of like the job description. Yes, the workplace habitat is part of the niche job description, but niche is so much more. An organism's niche is how the organism uses all of the resources in its environment. These resources can include the specific space, food, living range, mating range, water, interaction with other species. Pretty much any way an organism interacts with the environment and with other species is part of their niche. Here's the tie-in. If two different species have overlapping niches, the niche overlap creates interspecific competition. A famous ecologist called Georgy Gauss said that two species competing for the same niche cannot coexist. So if there's niche overlap, something's gotta happen. One thing that could happen as an outcome of interspecific competition and niche overlap is competitive exclusion. In this case, the case of competitive exclusion, the winner of the competition excludes the loser of the competition from the niche. The loser then either has to find a new niche or faces complete extinction. Competitive exclusion is shown in Gauss's famous experiment with paramecia, these single-celled organisms. The graph at the top shows population growth curves of the two species of paramecia grown separately. Each experiences logistic growth till they run out of a resource, probably space in the petri dish. But when the two species are grown together, though, it's a different story. Both species are affected negatively. The red species doesn't increase its population size as quickly, and it takes about 14 days instead of 10 days to reach the carrying capacity. In the end, though, the red species wins the competition and gets the whole niche. The blue species gets excluded from the niche altogether. This is competitive exclusion. Two species of Paramecium had niche overlap, the shared space of the petri dish, and that created interspecific competition. The red species had some kind of competitive advantage over the blue species and won the competition. The blue species was completely excluded from the niche. Another possible outcome of interspecific competition is resource partitioning. These anoles are a good example. Anoles are small reptiles that eat insects like crickets and flies, as well as spiders and larvae. And in this area, you can count 7 different species of anoles all eating the same thing. So if organisms can't coexist in the same niche, how can there be 7 species here in the same place? The key is that these anoles have divided the niche. A situation where interspecific competition results in every organism altering their niche into subniches is called resource partitioning. In other words, there's no clear winner and no clear loser. Instead, it's like every species has compromised as a result of the competition. These anoles down here just feed near the ground. These anoles feed on the tree trunks, and these anoles just feed in the tree canopy, so they don't overlap their niche anymore. You can summarize these two outcomes like this. Interspecific competition is caused by niche overlap between different species. Gauss's law says different species cannot coexist in the same niche. So one outcome of the competition is competitive exclusion. One species is now excluded from the niche overlap. The winning species gets the whole niche, and the losing species has to find a new niche or become extinct. Another outcome of the competition is resource partitioning. Both organisms compromise their niche as a result of the competition. The niche overlap is divided up between the competing species. As a result of interspecific competitions, organisms can actually evolve and change traits. When competition results in a shift in traits, this is called character displacement. These Galapagos finches are a great illustrative example. The two Galapagos finches are G. fuliginosa and G. fortis. Both species eat similar foods of seeds. For simplicity's sake, I'm going to call this guy the orange finch and this guy the green finch. And what we're keeping track of here is beak depth. So you can see beak depth on the x-axis. These finches live on 4 Galapagos islands: Los Hermanos, Daphne, Santa Maria, and San Cristobal. Los Hermanos is an island with only orange finches. You can see that the beak depth of orange finches is around 10 millimeters on Los Hermanos. Daphne is an island with just green finches. On Daphne, the green finches have a beak depth of around 10 millimeters too. So when the finches live on separate islands, they have the same beak depth. But when the finches are sympatric, like on the Santa Maria and San Cristobal Islands, they would be competitors. Both species eat the same type of seeds. Remember, Gauss's law tells us that species cannot exist in the same niche. So here's what happened. The orange species started eating smaller seeds compared to when they were by themselves. And the green finches started eating larger seeds compared to when they were by themselves. And as a result, the favorable beak sizes changed in both populations. Natural selection caused the orange finches to have smaller beaks and the green finches to have larger beaks. But the beak size change only happens when the orange and green finches live together. When the finches live apart, they have medium-sized beaks. This change in phenotype as a result of competition is character displacement. So let's recap. This video is about communities, interacting groups of different species. A species can interact with each other in a lot of different ways. One of those ways is predator-prey interactions, which result in evolution of both the predator species and the prey species. We talked about these specialized adaptations that result from coevolution of these interacting species. Gauss's law told us that species cannot coexist in the same niche, and that results in interspecific competition. Interspecific competition then results in competitive exclusion or resource partitioning. Character displacement is when species traits change as a result of this interspecific competition.